Jamal Carter had spent his entire life believing he knew where he came from. Raised by his mother, Angela, in the heart of Atlanta, he had learned from an early age that the world wasn't always fair to men like him. His mother worked 2 jobs, days as a paralegal, nights cleaning office buildings, just to keep them afloat. He had grown up watching her struggle, sacrificing everything to give him a shot at something better. He never knew his father. Angela had always been vague about him, offering only cryptic comments like he wasn't the kind of man who sticks around or you're better off without him. As Jamal grew older, he stopped asking. But everything changed the day the letter arrived. It came in a thick, ivory-colored envelope, the kind that looked expensive before you even touched it. The name on the return address read Jameson and Wells, attorneys at law. Jamal furrowed his brow, tearing it open with cautious fingers. Inside was a formal letter, dense with legal language, but one sentence stood out, making his heart pound. "We regret to inform you of the passing of Mr. Richard Langston, and as his biological son, you have been named in his last will and testament." Jamal's breath caught. He read the sentence again. And again. Richard Langston. The name meant nothing to him. But as he read further, the details fell into place like pieces of a cruel puzzle. Langston had been a powerful businessman, a real estate mogul who built an empire in the South. His fortune was vast. His family was old money. And somehow, inexplicably, he was Jamal's father. His hands shook as he turned the page. There it was, in black and white. Langston had left him $5 million. Jamal nearly dropped the letter. A million questions swirled in his mind. Why now? Did his father know about him all along? Had he ever cared? And, most pressing of all, why did it feel like this wasn't a gift, but a trap? Angela had been in the kitchen when he walked in, gripping the letter like it might vanish. She took one look at his face and sighed. "You found out." Jamal's stomach twisted. "You knew?" His voice was barely above a whisper. She nodded slowly. "I was going to tell you someday. But I also knew that family." She hesitated. "They weren't the kind of people who'd ever accept you." Jamal clenched his jaw. "Maybe they don't have a choice." Angela's eyes filled with something that looked a lot like fear. "Baby, they always have a choice. And men like them? They'll fight like hell to make sure you don't get what's yours." Jamal didn't care. For the first time in his life, he was standing at the edge of something bigger than himself. And no matter what it took, he was going to claim what was his. Even if it meant walking into a lion's den. The Langston estate was exactly what Jamal had expected, an obscene display of wealth. The mansion sat on acres of pristine land, its long driveway lined with towering oak trees that had probably been standing since before his ancestors were free men. Everything about the place screamed old money. He arrived in a simple black suit, nothing fancy, but enough to make him feel like he belonged. Except, he didn't. As soon as he stepped through the grand doors, the hostility in the air was palpable. They were all waiting for him. Richard Langston's widow, Margaret, sat in a high-backed chair, her spine straight as steel. Her expression was unreadable, but her cold blue eyes flicked over him like he was dirt under her shoe. Beside her stood Richard's 2 other children, Blake and Victoria Langston. Blake, the eldest, had the confident smirk of a man who had never been told no in his life. His tailored suit probably cost more than Jamal's entire wardrobe. Victoria, meanwhile, barely looked at him, her manicured fingers wrapped around the stem of a wine glass, her disinterest practically dripping from her posture. The family lawyer, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "Now that we're all here, let's discuss the terms of the will." But before he could continue, Blake leaned forward, his smile razor-sharp. "I think there's been a mistake." Jamal met his gaze, his voice even. "There's no mistake." Blake chuckled. "No offense, but you don't exactly belong here." Jamal felt a slow burn rise in his chest. Margaret sighed, setting down her tea. "Mr. Carter, let's be frank. My husband's decision was regrettable. But we have resources. We can offer you something reasonable to walk away. Jamal's jaw tightened. I don't want a payoff. I want what's mine. Victoria scoffed. God, you're embarrassing yourself. Jamal turned to the lawyer. Tell them. The lawyer hesitated, adjusting his glasses. Mr. Langston left explicit instructions. The inheritance is legally binding. Silence. Then, Blake stood. I hope you're ready for a fight, he said, his voice low, dangerous. Because the Langstons? We don't lose. Jamal lifted his chin. Neither do I. The next few months were hell. Lawsuits. Accusations. The Langstons dug up everything they could on Jamal, his finances, his past, even trying to smear Angela's name. But Jamal fought back. He hired his own lawyers. He stood his ground. And with every battle, the cracks in the Langston family began to show. Victoria, it turned out, had been siphoning money from the family business for years. Blake was drowning in gambling debts. And Margaret, saintly, proper Margaret, had begged the lawyers to contest the will, knowing full well that Richard had left money to Jamal because he actually felt guilty. In the end, the court ruled in Jamal's favor. He had won. But as he walked out of that final hearing, a weight still sat heavy in his chest. Had it been worth it? Sure, he had the money now. But was it really his? Or just a bitter reminder of a father who had never wanted him in the first place? That night, he visited Angela. She was sitting on their small porch, the same porch where she had raised him, loved him, built a life from nothing. He sat beside her, staring out at the street. So, she said softly. You got what you wanted? Jamal exhaled. I got what was mine. Angela nodded, studying his face. But did you find what you were looking for? Jamal was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, he shook his head. No. Angela reached over, squeezing his hand. Money doesn't make a family, baby. Love does. And for the first time in months, Jamal felt something settle inside him. Because maybe, just maybe, what he had already had was worth more than anything Richard Langston could have ever left behind.